Hi.
Hi.
Madame.
Okay, thank you.
La special actor? No.
How did you work on the season 2 without books, and what was Margaret Atwood's role on this second season?
Well, with Margaret, we really started to talk about season 2 halfway through season 1. Because you really have to think about kind of where you're going. Where, even though we were planning to end the season 1 as the book ended, you have to be very careful what you lay in so that you can make a second season. I really, I don't feel like season 2 is such a departure from season 1. It's still Margaret Atwood's world. It's still the characters. It's still the dynamics. It also still feels in that kind of that tone of Atwood. But it wasn't so hard because I don't know if you guys have read the book, but when you read the book, all you want is season 2. So I had been thinking about season 2 since I read the book, since in college. So there were lots of things that were mentioned in the book that we wanted to explore. The colonies, there's a child marriage part of the book, and so there were lots and lots of things for us to explore. So we were working off of a very strong foundation, and Margaret's been, was involved with season 2 from the very beginning. Came in the writers' room and talked to us and stuff. So honestly, the acclaim that season 1 got was harder to handle than the writing part. The writing part I'm used to. That part I wasn't used to.
And we know they are going to have season 3. So for you, how many seasons do you wish you can?
I on the one hand, I don't know what the number is, but I think there is a number. I think I certainly wouldn't want to stretch the show out. I always hate that when I'm watching a show that I like and it goes on beyond when I'm interested. The ideal would be at the end, I have a box of scripts and I put the last script in and I tape it closed and I say, wow, look, I did something good and I can move on to the next thing. But on the other hand, I could certainly see season 10 being the Nuremberg trials of Serena and the commander and seeing them hung in Canada. I mean, there's so much interesting stuff to do. But so we kind of take it one season at a time. I think, if I knew where exactly we were going, you guys all would know where we're going. Audiences are too savvy these days to really, I'm not going to fool you. I'm certainly not going to fool my kids. So, you have to I always feel like you just need enough to know that you have a place to go, and then I'm comfortable that I'll find either that place or someplace more interesting.
What can you tell us about your collaboration with directors Mike Barker, Kerry Scotland on season 2?
Oh, you got to ask again more slowly.
Sorry, what can you tell us about the collaboration with directors Mike Barker, Kerry Scotland on season 2?
Their interaction with each other, or with me?
Yeah, with you.
Oh, they're spectacular. They both directed in season 1, yes. Which makes it a lot easier when they come back in season 2. They're both very strong directors. Mike Barker was our directing producer, so he was an executive producer on the show for the season. So he's around for everybody. My interaction with directors is very close. I mean, you try to go through. We have a preparation period of about 9 days, and you try to go to as many meetings as you can and sit and go through the excruciating minutia of the script over and over and over again to really make it very clear, because the show it doesn't have a lot of talking, and so you have to be very precise about what you want out of each moment, because you're not going to get it through the dialogue. They are incredible professionals, have so many shows under their belt, and also they were there at the beginning. And the better part of this year, the easier part of season 2, is people have something to watch. When they came in season 1, there was no show we couldn't show them anything, and because there was nothing to see. And so I think that our collaboration this year has been an attempt to kind of go deeper than just this is the show, but this is this episode, this is what this world can be.
With social media today, do you feel some pressure to the fans that you need to go further and further, or you just go with what it is in your mind?
Well, definitely the latter. I mean, I listen to what the fans say. I try to be mindful of that conversation. But you know, in some ways, if you let that tell you what stories to tell, you're going to disappoint them. So instead, I mean, it isn't really from my head, it's more from Offred's head or from June's head. I mean, I try to let her drive the story. What would happen next? What really would happen? So I don't know how much you guys have seen, but you know, at the beginning of this season, she gets away and then she gets caught. And it's very disappointing, but she's in Gilead. She's a pregnant handmaid. She's not Jason Bourne. She would get caught. You know, chances are someone would catch her because that's what they're built to do. And although it's terribly disappointing, it's a 1 in a million shot for her to get out, and she doesn't roll the dice 1 in a million. So we try very hard to think in an incredibly simplistic way of what would really happen. Sometimes I think the fans, you know, they have wishes and dreams, and there are wishes and dreams for happiness and safety and you know, to erase the last few years of June's life and reunite her with her husband and child. But you also have to look at the reality of the world you're in and the story you're telling. And once you start kind of being not true to that, any success you have isn't satisfying for the audience.
It feels like the second season is way much darker than the first one in the settings or the photography. So is it what you had in mind at the beginning or not?
I don't think we ever aimed at being darker. There are some things where you just naturally follow the characters, and they broke a lot of rules in season 1, and you know, if Gilead doesn't have any repercussions for that, then the show doesn't make any sense. So, I have very low tolerance for violence, and you know, I don't like that stuff. So we try very hard to show only what we need to show, what naturally comes, and also is imperative to tell the story. At the beginning of the season, there's an execution, a mock execution. Well, if we hadn't shown that, and afterwards someone said, well, they were going to hang us, but they didn't, that doesn't have any impact. You have to feel what they're going through. And so it's horrible, but that's the point, is it's supposed to be horrible. So I think that, but I disagree personally. I don't think season 2 is darker. I think any day we're offered, any episode where she's alive at the end is a huge victory. So I think she's doing great. And I think that, you know, there's lots of terrible stuff happening around her, but boy, she's you know, getting through that ice field.
I read many good reviews on social media, but also people who criticize the fact that to shame violence against women, you show a lot of violence against women.
Yeah, I mean, I have the same problem, and we're always struggling with that. I mean, you certainly don't want to. I mean, how do you show Gilead, a place where, you know, they are very violent and treat women like, you know, dehumanize women and treat them like sexual slaves, and they're horrible to them without showing it. It's kind of the nature of the beast. And once again, we try to show what is necessary to show to tell the story. You know, in season 1, we had a female genital mutilation story. We didn't show anything. We didn't even say what had happened. She wakes up, she has a bandage, someone talks to her, but no one says female genital mutilation or anything. It's horrifying because of what happened, but we're not showing anything, we're just talking about it. And so, you know, it's a balance, and it's a difficult balance, and it's something we talk about with every scene, with every piece of editing that we do. And it's one of the things that makes it hard is that our actors, Elisabeth and the rest of the cast, are so strong that you take something and they bring it to life, and it just, you know, you're horrified, you know, because it feels like it's really happening. And whereas on paper it might not have been as bad, you know, once you see it on screen, it's gut wrenching, and so you have to be very careful. You know, as I say, we're shooting with live ammo when we have Lizzie. You know, if you say this is terrible, it'll feel terrible.
Did you work with the actors to find where you're going to push characters?
Of course, we are lucky to have a very smart, very collaborative, incredibly experienced group of actors. I mean, they've all been on lots of other shows. They've all, been on shows that lasted a long time. So, but as much as working with them, I do a lot more just watching what they do in the show and deciding where to push them. Because, if I asked you kind of what were, your best abilities as a writer, that might be very different than if I read your stuff and decided what your best abilities were as a writer and then decided how to push you. So I try to get the proof in the pudding, look at the work and say, wow, that person it's funnier than I thought, or it's weirder than I thought, or wow, there's a strange chemistry between those people that they might not even notice. So you really try to take that from what is the final product and how can I use that. It's one of the wonderful things about TV is that you have the ability to adjust as you're going along. I mean, it is a little like you're painting a car during a car race. It's going 1,000 miles an hour and you're trying to change things, but it's a great benefit because you get to say, oh, that didn't work out the way that I wanted it, maybe I can change it in the next thing.
Do you think having a certain responsibility to make this TV show at the time of Me Too movement?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, especially with the Me Too movement, because so much of that came out of our own industry. I mean, it's a very personal experience. I mean, I don't know if it would have been the same if so many of those stories had come out of other industries, initially. But these are, these writers, producers, actors are people I know and people I've worked with for 30 years. They're my friends, and you feel shitty. You feel awful that they've been that their careers have been curtailed, that they've been going through these experiences. And on the one hand, you feel like an idiot for not noticing, and on the other hand, you feel just heartbroken that in some way you weren't available to be spoken to. You weren't there to help. No one felt like they could tell you what was going on. And these are people I've known for a very long time. So I think you can't help but have, to extrapolate from that to kind of just the underpinnings of a place like Gilead. And luckily, it started a lot of conversations beyond just, you telling me what happened to you, but you telling me what happened to your friends, because your friends all of a sudden are talking to you. So we can get a lot more wide range of stories. But, just personally, it's heartbreaking and hard to get, it's hard to get your mind around, and certainly something you never feel like you're going to get over. You feel like a jerk.
But your show today is kind of an evidence with Me Too movement or the Trump and so on. But we ask ourselves, why 5 years ago you say, okay, in 5 years it will be the good stuff to take this old novel from the 80s and it will be so relevant?
I wish my show was irrelevant. That's what I'm hoping, very much so, that my show becomes, that everybody goes, wow, that would never happen. I think the same. I don't think it's not a crystal ball. It's much more that the same forces that came to bear to create the Me Too movement and the election of Trump, unfortunately, were the forces that we were feeling as writers when we were working on the show. But more importantly, it's Margaret. I mean, Margaret saw those forces rubbing up against each other 35 years ago. And us updating the things that were pushing those things together with the internet, is really just taking her foundation and moving it ahead, but it's not reinventing it at all.
On this second season, we see a little about the working class in the society. We get to see more.
We got to see some this season. We get to see a little bit more. The character of Eden is from the working class. Nick is in the working class. We get to see pieces. It's just another thing that I would love to spend time with. I mean, it's fast. All those things are just fascinating to me. Like, what are the Econo lives like? I mean, the number of conversations about what their apartment building looked like, all those things are amazing. But I think as we move forward in the show, we are constantly trying to both see and experience the different parts of society, not just see them and get a glimpse of them, but in fact experience what it's like to be part of it.
Of course, when we watch a show, the obvious ending is the woman, of course, taking the lead. Are you the kind of going to the obvious way, or do you already have a surprise ending in your mind?
I don't have an ending in my mind, as I said before. You know, I would, you know, you guys would have the same ending if I had the ending in my mind. You know, the obvious ending is often the obvious ending in television or in a movie. You know, as I said, you know, when Offred tries to escape in the beginning, she gets caught. The only time people get away is in movies, and in real life, people get caught. You know, and so it's the same thing that, you know, the obvious ending often diverges from the real ending. We start with the real ending, and in some ways, people say they're always so shocked at what happens to the show. In the show, almost always what happens is what would happen. Now, you know, it's and that's what's surprising, is because that never happens on TV. But it's just, you know, we're very straightforward in terms of, we sit down and say, well, what would these people do and why, and that's what we do.
So what I also like about season 2 is the number of flashbacks you have. So you explain much more things about how everything led to this. And I also liked in last week episode this flashback with Serena. So she had a much more important role than now. So
I know. She made her bed, now she has to lie in it.
yeah.
What's your question?
Just wanted to know how it was to balance this, because it seems like she had the upper hand before.
Yes, I think it's one of the things that helps you understand her, maybe not be sympathetic to her, certainly, but understand, you know, why she's so furious all the time. And also to see that she and Offred have something in common. You know, they overlap a lot. They're both very intelligent. One was a writer, one was an editor. You know, Serena was very outspoken and Offred wasn't, but they certainly were all kind of aware of the political world. I'm fascinated by the backstories of the characters. But I don't like to show flashbacks. I like to tell stories in the past, because I feel like flashbacks are just, if you just show like a little flash of something that happened a while ago, I understand that it fills in a little thing, but I'd rather tell full, interesting stories. And so for Serena, the story of kind of what she faced and how certain she was about her solution to the world's problems, that to me was just painted a really interesting portrait of her strength.
There is feminists who think that the patriarchal oppression came only from men, and I have the impression that the show shows that there is also women who are involved in it. When we see Aunt Lydia or Serena, they are strong agents of the patriarchal oppression. Sometimes they look stronger than Mr. Waterford or other men.
In the book, Margaret makes a big point about that. You know, the oppression of women is often takes the form of other women. The way I looked at it was less about the patriarchy and more about a totalitarian state. How the oppressed people in a totalitarian state are often employed to oppress that group, from Jews in World War II to you know, certain minorities all across you know, Europe now. That you know, the way the people who know those groups the best and can infiltrate them the best are the people who are members of them. I do think it's one of the most horrifying and hard to swallow parts of the show, really, is the fact that the cruelest of the cruel are the women. But it does seem to make sense in terms of the way that they organize society. And as you were saying, that there's a certain venom, frustration that the women are taking out on the other women. I think it's taking place in a world of patriarchy, but it really is more of a totalitarian example than something specifically to do with patriarchy.
Was there at the beginning and for the season 2 influence from cinema or series for doing this series? Or?
Well, for me, and when I sat down with Reed Morano, who directed the first few episodes, and Colin Watkinson, you know, you pick out more than cinematic references. You pick out pieces of film, You know, we all, you know, I'm a big fan of Stanley Kubrick visually, but acting style-wise and story-wise, not so much. But visually, we talked about, in fact, the font that we use for The Handmaid's Tale is you know, a slight change off of the font that Kubrick used in most of his movies as the title font. But just in terms of the care of the colors and how they butt up against each other, that was taken from there. But, you know, Reed Morano had been a director of photography and had an encyclopedic knowledge of looks and that kind of thing. But I'm a big movie watcher. And Reed and I had a good language of, let's steal this scene from this movie and this scene from this movie and this scene from this movie and glue them all together.
Do you thinking about making a special episode? Maybe a very happy episode or a musical?
I don't know that would fit in the style of the show. I think it would be hilarious, but a Christmas episode. Last year, the cast sent out, I don't know if you saw it online, Christmas cards. Did you see? Which was just them all dressed up like the Waterfords in front of the fire. It was Merry Christmas from the Waterfords. They looked so unhappy, and it was so funny. But that was just internal. I think, you know, so the other thing, you know, you always wonder what the gag reel from a show looks like, you know, with the mistakes on set. Unfortunately, our people are so on top of it all the time. They're too gagged. There's nothing that we can show. But no, there's not going to be a musical episode. I'm sorry.
Are we going to see what is happening with the characters' refuge in Canada?
Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think the refugee experience in Canada, first of all, is reflected so much in the news these days of refugees all over the world, but also the idea, a lot of the stories we tell are proxy versions of Offred. So this is to say, if she escapes, things aren't going to be all rosy. You know, you'll still have a lot to deal with. You know, that so what you're doing is kind of being able to tell a story about a possible future for Offred without having to have her escape. I mean, if you look at the way Janine handles the world, she seems to have lost her mind, but she also seems pretty happy. It's a good option for Offred. The way Emily deals with the world by fighting tooth and nail all the time, she doesn't seem too happy, but that's also another option. So I think that so I think what you want to do is be able to tell lots of different versions of Offred's possible future at the same time. But also I'm fascinated by the idea of, you know, what would happen if 25 million Americans moved to Canada? You know, what would happen to Canada? And, you know, a place that's very open to refugees. So it's fascinating to me just on that base level.
What's the weirdest feedback you get on the show by women and men?
One of the stranger things is that I get equal numbers of women saying Offred's an idiot and Offred's a genius. Like everybody has, you know, for the same moment. Or I would never do that. You get a lot of I would never do that. But you know, sometimes, and this happens all the time on every show, but oftentimes the show is criticized for something that happened that a woman would never do, when it was either Lizzie's idea to do it or you know, it was a woman's idea. That doesn't mean that it is something that a woman would do, but that's where it comes from. It's kind of directed at me. You know, as a boy, I would never know this, and you know, certainly a woman would never write that. And inevitably, those are things either we wrote together or a woman did. From men, I think men are nastier about Serena. That's the weirdest thing, I think, that they are nasty and like want to kill her, violently want to kill her in ways that surprise me. But the other thing is, I think how as much as women are really affected by Offred's loss of her daughter, the men in the story, you know, feeling of Luke, of the loss of the wife and the daughter, that just makes them feel impotent and broken in a way that that I was surprised that there's both that and anger. But weird, there's plenty of weird. Go on Twitter.
So before that, you've worked on The 100, and what I like about this show and the Handmaid's Tale is that you're representing women, minorities, personalities, people from every origins or anything. So I really would like to thank you about this. And also, I really like the way you're showing those people in this series.
Well, I think the key is that when you have 1,000 channels, you have to start showing. If you show one point of view on 1,000 channels, it's boring. You got to start. But also, you know, on Handmaids, you know, we try to just look around our world and have those people reflected, or look around the world in Boston actually, and have those people reflected in the show. We don't try to reach to make some sort of statement, and we don't want to ignore to make some sort of a statement. It is very much a balancing act.
Last question, guys.
Yes. Yes. My question after the 200, the 100 is, you used to make, let's say, a cool dystopic show we like and so on. And what decided you to say, okay, this time I will do a very controversial show about gender. All the people around the world will be against or like it, and it will be. It's not very comfortable.
Did you really think I said, okay, this one I'm going to do so everybody around the world is going to have a different opinion on it, and it's going to be really controversial?
I asked for a reaction. Maybe
Yes.
it's too much the way I say it. I know.
You know, you really do try to make each show to be each show. So on the 100, you know, I didn't create the 100. You know, Jason Rothenberg created the show, but the thing I liked about the 100 and the lesson I really took from it was the more realistic you make it, the more you make it about these people in this situation, the more effective it is. And it was more of a high concept idea. It had a lot more kind of fantastical elements, but it was a lesson that I took to the Handmaid's Tale. So, you know, I have an odd career when you look at it from the outside, but the unifying factor is I like to write grounded characters that feel like people in the real world. And so a career of that, including the 100, when I was able to create a show and I was able to do it from, you know, I wrote the first script in every script, I was able to lay that philosophy in more clearly at the beginning. And my writing staff, who was with me, some of them were with me on the 100, some of them with me on Alpha, some of them were with me on Eureka, were all at that point kind of geared. They knew what that meant. You know, they worked very well on those other shows, but they knew what the goal was on this show, and to keep it very, very grounded. Because honestly, once it starts feeling not like the real world, it's not scary anymore. It's really practical. I mean, once you are going, oh, that would never happen, it becomes a lot less. It's a non-interesting show. It's only scary because you're worried that it's going to happen, and you're only worried if it feels real.